start now? Okay. We will begin the Building, Zoning, and Development Committee this evening at 7:22 p.m. Present are committee members Williamson, Schuman, and Limpert. Council members Glassburn, Heeman, and Kelly. We have our law director, the mayor, our planning director, and guests. On the agenda this evening is the same ordinance that we heard for the public hearing tonight. Forgive me, I had it in front of me. It is ordinance 2020-77, an ordinance amending section 1135.02 of the zoning code of the city of North Olmsted entitled Accessory Uses for the purpose of eliminating the 200-foot residential lot setback requirement for animals shelters used for chickens. I know that there were questions that came from the public. I know that I do have a couple questions, and I am going to defer to our planning director to see if there's any additional information she'd like to add or any statements she'd like to add before we go ahead with our questions.
Chairwoman Williamson, I apologize for interrupting. I got a message from a council member that I didn't recognize folks for questions of residents in the previous meeting. If residents want to stick around for this, please feel free to do so. And it sounds like at least one council person will have a question to offer. Sorry to interrupt.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to go into a bit more detail about the Planning and Design Commission recommended changes. They felt that chicken coops should be treated somewhat different than other types of animal shelters, and did feel that I think would agree that the fact that we allow up to 10 hens on any size lot, but then have a 200 setback rule for a shelter created a conflict where you're saying you can have chickens, but most people that would keep chickens will keep them in some sort of enclosure, which is then regulated under our zoning code. So I think there are two main concerns of the Planning and Design Commission. First is they wanted to reduce the required setback, but not completely eliminate it. Currently, the 200-foot setback applies to the street line and also to dwellings on adjacent properties. The Planning and Design Commission recommended 25 feet to a neighboring dwelling. They did not think that there should be a required setback to the dwelling on the same property with the coop. I think that they looked at that number as one that would set it back from the dwelling, but still allow placement on most residential lots. Keep in mind that our typical zoning ordinance, so single family A, B, C, the minimum lot widths are 60, 70, and 80 feet wide. So if we're measuring a setback from a property line, if that setback is 30, 40, 50 feet, then the smaller lots just you can't locate a coop according to code. So that's where the 25 feet from the dwelling, they did not want to use the property line basis, but 25 feet from a neighboring dwelling. They also felt that there should be a requirement that they be contained to prevent them from encroaching on neighboring properties, but stop short of specifically requiring a yard to be fenced. They know that fences can be a significant investment, especially when you think of privacy fences or chain link fences that might surround a property, and felt that that wasn't a requirement for other types of animal shelters and did not think it should be imposed for this particular use. However, I think the language that they were suggesting was containment, and then I think stop short of defining what that containment would be. So that concludes my remarks at the moment, but I'm happy to answer any questions if council has of me. Thank you.
Thank you, Director. I had a question regarding roaming chickens. So what would preclude a neighbor from, if they had a fenced-in yard, are they permitted to allow their chickens to roam freely through their yards?
that would certainly be possible. I think some of the chicken proponents at the meeting talked about the benefit of allowing chickens to roam to different parts of the yard for feeding and such. We even talked about the possibility of a mobile coop and how that could be regulated, still have to meet the setbacks, but it would be less of a permanent structure and more of a mobile situation. So I think there's a lot of different types of coop situations. It's hard to maybe write one rule that would fit all possible models for housing chickens.
Thank you, Director. I have one other question regarding the shelters. I know that the size is not to exceed 12 feet high. Is there any kind of ordinance or any kind of coverage if someone were to build a structure that's similar to a shed? I have seen, mind you, they are very nice shelters that have doors on them where people can walk in and tend to the chickens there. Is there anything that would prevent a resident from putting one of these structures up?
Madam Chair, this is starting to cross over into some building territory, so I might ask our building official who's here to weigh in on that. Minimum or maximum rear yard lot coverage would come into play in terms of limiting the size of the structure. And then, as you mentioned, the height of accessory structures cannot exceed, I believe, 12 feet. I don't know how the residential code treats chicken coops, or if they could become the chicken Taj Mahal, or if they're, regulated to some smaller extent. But again, I think maybe Mr. Grusenmeyer can speak to that.
Well, thank you, Kim. The size is going to principally be restricted or determined by the zoning ordinance, which restricts, I believe, the rear yard to 20% coverage. So given that, if you have a very large lot, you could conceivably have a very large structure, not only a chicken coop, but many other types of structures. So it's basically an accessory structure. It's combined with all the other accessory structures not to cover more than 20% of your yard or rear yard. So that's the general size restriction. As far as the building code, it's an accessory structure, and the building code really starts regulating those or reviewing those at greater than 200 square feet. So my assumption would be most typical chicken coops, I would assume, would probably be less than 200 square feet. I could be wrong. So in general, we would only be reviewing for zoning, which is basically the location and size of the structure. If someone wanted to erect such a structure, it probably wouldn't be regulated under the building code unless they really wanted a larger structure at that time. So hopefully that answers. If I didn't answer your question, please let me know if there are any further questions on it.
Thank you. I saw Mr. Limpert and then Mr. Schuman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. A couple questions, Kim. One is I just want to make sure it's clear. I was getting a little lost when you said you got rid of from the street setback 200 feet. Is there anything that prevents the coop being set up in the front yard? Is it only permitted in the rear area? Okay.
Correct.
Okay. And then just a comment. I think we would want to consider, as Ms. Williamson was noting about the free range. We probably do want to look at some legislation around keeping those chickens contained at night hours, as a lot of the concern is with attracting predators, and also just from a noise perspective, the whole goal of moving the setback away is to kind of move it away from local structures. So I think something like that should be considered, especially during quiet hours or nighttime hours.
Madam Chair, if I may. Thank you. I just want to point out, in terms of animals that are at large, our code 50501 does specifically call out chickens, and it prohibits them from running at large in any public place or upon unenclosed or upon any unenclosed lands or upon the premises of another. So we'll probably have to look at that section. I just looked it up now. It just occurred to me when people started talking about roaming chickens. At a minimum, if you have your yard is unfenced and chickens are leaving your premises onto another, that would be a potential violation of the code. Probably wouldn't be good stewardship of your chickens either, but it's called out in the code.
Yeah, thank you, Director. I think I'm also talking about just in general of during nighttime hours, having those chickens, even in your own yard, you know, hanging out by the fence that's right next to the neighbor's, you know, window.
That's a good way to be without chickens. Leaving them out at night.
Mr. Limpert, are you finished?
I am, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Schuman?
Thank you. I just for clarification, unfortunately, I've become an expert on chicken coops. The average chickens on average only need about 3 square feet to be kept. So even if you were to keep chickens with 5 square feet, and this is on one level, you'd be talking about a 50 square feet maximum enclosure for them. Now, at more than that, you start talking about free range chickens. You can actually have the chickens running loose, even inside of an enclosure. Chickens can be kept in very minimal, even less than 1.5 feet, and be raised and be used for eggs. It doesn't sound like a nice thing to do to your pet chickens, but that is a thing you can do. So we're not really talking about a very big structure here. And of course, chickens can't fly. So these are usually 1 story. They may be 2 story, but if they are, that would mean instead of 50 square feet on the ground, you could have 25 feet up in the air and 25 feet on the first floor. Thank you.
Mr. Schuman, being the expert that you have become, would
Thank
you
you so much. I appreciate that.
would you kindly enlighten me on,
Okay.
and perhaps the rest of us who are not who do not raise chickens? I have enough animals in my house, as you all know. I can't afford to put any more inside or out. But how do you care for the chickens in the winter? And do people have enclosures for them? They're not kept in,
I think you should ask Mr. Dorn about that. He's an expert. He's actually got chickens. So
who is that? Mr. Jark or Mr. Dorn? Okay.
Chickens don't need any special requirements during the wintertime. Their feathers are perfectly sufficient to keep themselves comfortable. In my chicken coop, it has everything can close down. They can go inside and they bed down in the hay if they get cold, and they huddle together basically. They don't need anything special. Some people say you could put like a heat lamp or a light in there, but you don't even need that.
Right, but as long as there's hay or something for them to shelter them from the cold, I'm just thinking of these poor chickens being in these wire cages or containment.
That's factory farms. That's not what anybody here.
I didn't think so.
The people who own chicken coops that do kind of what we're doing in the city of North Olmsted, things like that. The life that they provide for those chickens is a far better life than the life that a factory farm provides for them. Even some of the farms that are free ranging. So,
right. I appreciate that. I'm just making sure we're covering all our bases for anyone who might think it's
cruel.
Not a good thing. So thank you so much for your comments. Ms. Heeman, I see your hand up, and then Mr. Limpert.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few questions. So with regard to setbacks and those types of things, I guess my curiosity is, are these folks more interested in having them away from their homes, or they're willing to put the chicken coops closer to their homes to not irritate neighbors, for example? And I ask that question because, they are messy. They attract, rodents, coyotes even. I live over here by the golf course, and, we have big hawks that just come pick up little white fluffy dogs and carry them off. So there's a lot that goes on in nature right here in my backyard, and it's across the street from Springvale. And I'd also like to, for those of you that don't know a lot about me, preface so that you understand my questioning. I do most things from scratch. I bake, I cook, I sew. I do home canning, actually put meat, beef stew, chicken, whole chicken breasts in jars. Most of my food comes from farmers, and I purchase on average in the beginning of canning season to the end, at least 6 dozen ears of corn to put in jars. I purchase a bushel of tomatoes a week that I process and put into sauces and things. So I'm into sustainability and all those things. My husband makes fun of me for washing aluminum foil and saran wrap and reusing it. So that said, I get that part of it. I also do Weight Watchers. I eat about 6 eggs a day. My question to both of these residents really is, so your interest is in providing for your families. Clearly you live in urban environments and not in farming environments. So do you purchase currently from other farmers to sustain them? I'll ask just a couple questions and feel free to answer, Mr. Jarkin, Mr. Derencott, if you don't mind. So on average, are you planning on slaughtering your chickens? Are they just for eggs? Do you purchase from the farmers that are at Frostville Market that I know Mr. Schuman is heavily involved in? I purchase from a lot of different farmers and have done that for probably 20 years now. I actually purchased from farmers in North Carolina for my daughter. So if you could tell me what your level of sustainability is and how it relates to why the need for chickens and what else you do in your lives to promote that is probably one of the things I'm interested in. And then I would have follow-up questions, Ms. Williamson, if I may, but if not, I'll defer to
Yes.
Mr. Limpert.
Follow-up questions are fine, but if we could keep to the topic, that would be great.
Well, I think that is the topic. The topic, Madam Chair, is that one of the residents said that it was a need to provide for his family, and there are other ways to do that and sustain environment.
Ms. Heeman, with all due respect, with the sewing and all of the extra things that I get it. I'm just trying to figure out where the questions are coming. So if we could just stick to that.
The questions are coming from their need for sustainability and their argument that they need to raise chickens. That's all, because they need to feed their families, and there are ways to do that. So if I can have my questions answered, please.
That's fine. I will call on everyone when it's time to speak, if you don't mind. I believe Mr. Dorencott or Mr. Jark, were you going to respond to the councilwoman?
I can respond to that.
Thank you. You have the floor.
Currently on my own property, I grow my own food. I use the chicken, not only do I collect the eggs for food as well, I also use their chicken manure in composting. I have a 3-bin system currently and being implemented, and that goes straight back into my gardening. So I'm sustaining as much as I can on my own property. So I am sustaining. I don't go to the food markets, but I grow my own food. So, and I supplement as much as I can as far as my food is concerned, away from the grocery store. So that answers your question.
Ms. Heeman, your follow-up? Oh, Mr. Jark, go ahead.
No, that's. I was just only going to add, my family and I are just getting started in this discussion about chickens, but we do our best to, we have a pretty small lot and it's covered with trees, so we're not really great at gardening. We don't have that ability like a lot of people, but we're also Catholics. We also talk about sustainability from the perspective of care for the earth and care for the environment and care for our common home. Which is a big deal in our family. And so we do as much as we can with recycling, with reusing food, with composting, with things like that we can do, given our house and our family situation. So we started talking about different ways that we could approach sustainability with water conservation and other things like that. We started talking about chickens. And so in our family, at least, we're going to start off with just the idea, of course, if this goes through, with the idea of raising them for eggs and talking about how to be as resourceful as we can with caring for them as animals and using the resources they provide in a sustainable manner. So we're just kind of getting into this. We're not nearly as far down the path as Mr. Dorncott, but those are some of our intentions at least.
Thank you. Ms. Heeman, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And thank you for answering those questions, because I think one of the things to consider here is that while some of us do, want to live that way, I obviously don't have available space for gardening really and all that sort of thing for the volume that I prefer to do. But North Olmsted really is it's a city, it's an urban environment, not a farming environment. And so I am wanting to know some of those things just for the reasonable aspect of why does everyone else live in North Olmsted, and it's because it's an urban environment. So my other question, if I may ask another, is so are you planning then, well, obviously Mr. Dorncott has his chicken coop already, and Director Lieber, perhaps you or Mr. Grusenmeyer could answer this as well. Pre-built chicken coops that you can, you buy, I've seen them online, because I did as well, Mr. Schuman, do a lot of research, and most suburbs don't permit this. But are you recommending a kind of prefab chicken coop? What are the building requirements if someone wants to build their own? I had a resident that was recently, had big violations for wanting to re-roof his chicken coop. So we worked that out for him. But what are the recommendations with regard to prefab versus, all of that with the specifications of building them? And would they be encouraged to put them closer to their own homes rather than on the rear of their property where a neighbor might be more offended by that? Thank you.
Madam Chair, I guess on the issue of homemade prefab, there's really no zoning requirements, I think, to speak of regarding the construction of the coop. I think Mr. Grusenmeyer mentioned once it gets beyond 200 square feet, there's probably building code requirements that would come into play, but less than that, I think it would just be subject to property maintenance for being well maintained, whatever it may be. And I think the recommendation by the Planning and Design Commission was to only have a setback from a neighboring dwelling and not to have any required setback from the dwelling of the person hosting the chickens. And I think this was the thought here was that that folks might like to have the chickens closer to their home for accessibility or adjacent to their garage, and that a long setback that would be from their house would push the coop into the far rear yard, which might then impact the rear yard neighbors more than if it were kept close to the house. So I do think that the Planning Commission thought eliminating any requirement for spacing from the dwelling on the lot would allow for that, would allow for those chickens to be close to the occupant's home.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Limpert, did you have your hand up? Ms. Heeman,
I did, thank you.
Wait, Mr. Limpert, Ms. Heeman, were you finished? Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Limpert, I'm sorry.
Oh, thank you, Madam Chair. So I just wanted to clarify with the law director. So for the care and maintenance of chickens, do we just revert? Is there state guidelines on that we would just follow as far as care and maintenance, or how does that come into play here?
I'm not, Madam Chair, I'm not familiar with any particular criteria for maintenance and care of poultry on a local level, like as in someone having a coop in their backyard. Obviously, to the extent that if the animals are neglected, we have local codes that will deal with animals being abused or neglected. And then also that would fall into the category of state law. I know state law has kind of bumped up some of their penalties recently. So I don't know that there's any minimum criteria for good stewardship of chickens. But certainly if they're abused, neglected, then we have some enforcement mechanisms available to us. So we don't have any local criteria for size and whatnot. And I'm not aware of any federal level or state level either.
And then a follow-up is as it relates to the butchering, or when if somebody's going to cook up their chicken, so to speak, or everything like that. There's no guidelines, and they're free to butcher their chicken and eat it, right?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned, I'm not aware of any local requirement. I'll go back and look through it. It's the same thing you have in hunting season when people dress the deer that they get. They can bring them back and dress them right in their yard if they need to, and butcher the animal right then and there. We don't have any that I recall, and I've not seen anything in there that deals with that as far as the slaughtering of animals and preparing them for butcher.
Thanks.
Are there any additional questions? Mr. Glassburn, I see your hand up.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So I have, usually people ask questions that they mean to be statements. I have some statements that I mean to be questions. I would like to see us, if we're going to go in this direction or consider going this direction seriously, really flesh out the ideas and I appreciate the Planning and Design Commission throwing out a number of 25 and some residents throwing out some opinions of numbers in terms of setback distances. But I believe there are other cities that either have considered doing this. I want to say Lakewood had a big discussion on this issue. I don't know which cities have or have not implemented it. But I'd like to learn from the experience of other cities and how they manage this and what exactly they put in their ordinances, as opposed to us reinventing the wheel on this. So that's, I guess, the first thing. Secondly, North Olmsted is a 5-mile wide city, and on the western side and central side we have homes that are larger and some have larger areas. On the eastern side, though, we have homes that are on major roads like Clegg or Walter that have large setbacks. But we also have a ton of 1,000-square-foot homes that are right on top of each other. I'm not sure that this is a great match for most of the homes, at least in my ward. I think the 25 feet actually might prohibit the majority of the homes in my ward. I'm not exactly certain. I didn't go measure each home in between each other on this. So I'm not sure how it fits for my area, I guess. Along those lines, this is an actual specific question that I would be interested to hear from Mr. Jark or Mr. Dorncott or any other resident with experience. Where exactly do you, not necessarily for your yard, but where would you envision for your yard or others' yards where these would go? I assume with these setbacks, these aren't going on the sides of houses because those would be the closest places to other houses. So it's going to be on the rear of the house somewhere. If you could just paint a little bit of a picture for us on where exactly these coops might be or how we should think of these, or if there's some analogy you can make, it might be helpful.
Mr. Dorncott or Mr. Jark, which one who would like to take it? Adam, I'm going to refer to you. Okay. But I do want to make it noted that both of you stated this evening that neither of you plan to slaughter your chickens or use them for meat. They're just for laying.
I'm trying to make it more palatable for some people. I mean, if a bird dies, I mean, I'd probably feather it, and use it that way. I'm not going to waste it. But I don't know if this has the ability. I can provide pictures of where mine is set to give an idea, to literally draw a picture. I don't know if I have the ability to. I actually did send an email to Paul. I don't know if he could. Maybe he wants to provide screen pictures of where my chicken coop is to get a visual representation, or Otherwise,
Mr. Dorncott, let me just, Mr. Schuman, are you able to send those pictures through your email to our clerk?
Sure.
And perhaps he could share them on the screen for a moment? If the rest of council would be interested in seeing that, because I certainly would.
and I recently put up a fence to doubly layer my chicken coop as well. So I have a fence around my chicken coop as well as my chicken coop is being enclosed.
And just to kind of second that, in Breckenridge, much like a lot of the developments on the western end, the lots are pretty standard from house to house. And so in our yard, when we were looking at it, we have a nice little grove of trees right in the, basically dead smack in the middle of the backyard, where it would fit perfectly. So, you know, they would be away from, we have a fenced in backyard like most of the lots around us as well. And so, you know, I can envision that just sitting right, you know, smack in the middle of the yard. And then, you know, they've got the ability to, you know, roam around if they need to, and then they can run into the coop at night and be, you know, be contained. So at least if you're kind of looking overhead, it would definitely be in the backyard. It would definitely be, you know, away from fence lines. It would be, you know, basically right smack in the middle of the square.
Thank you. Madam Chair, if I may, just two more items. So I grew, prior to moving to North Olmsted, I grew up in a rural township a number of miles out of Paynesville proper. And so I have some distant memories of chickens. Our neighbors had them. And I guess the thing I just wanted to stress on that is, I wouldn't say they're quite the same as having a pet bird, but they're not pets. They're a different thing. And so it sounds like Mr. Dorncott and Mr. Jark have a good handle on this, but there wasn't a year when I was a kid where a number of families would think it was a cute idea to give their children chicks on Easter, and all of a sudden those chicks were now becoming chickens that lived at my neighbor's house. So, you know, with more prevalence of chickens, you know, we just have to make sure we're paying attention to issues that might unintended arise. Lastly, I'll just say that I'd like to make sure that we're fair with this code. I know we're trying to address a unique situation, but that we're fair and consistent with how we treat other things. And I'm not going to pick too big of a fight on other issues, but, you know, we're fairly stringent about how we regulate sheds, how we regulate garages, how we regulate other structures. And, you know, I don't want people calling sheds chicken coops to get around other restrictions, nor do I want it to be less or more of a burden, not necessarily for anybody on this issue. And it was mentioned that a number of years ago that we dealt with other animals. Just want to make sure that we're being culturally sensitive. We're not picking certain animals over others. If we expand the ability to have these chicken coops near homes, we may want to really think through what our rational reason is to continue to prevent other animals that others may want to have close to their property as well. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Jark, did you have a response or did you have a comment?
Sure. Just to kind of follow up on that, as Councilman Truman had mentioned earlier, there is a thing called chicken math, which might kind of answer some of this question. And so in the code right now, you're limited to 10 hens. And so if you kind of do the math from that, the size of the structure is going to be limited. And then, as Mrs. Lieber had said before, too, some of those codes are going to be limiting in the size of the structure. So I think that there's some things that are already kind of built in there that, as you talk about the number of hens that you're allowed to have, and you have a minimum, square footage per hen. That's going to limit the size of the structure. And so there could even be, some kind of provision in there for a square foot per bird up to 10 that then limits the max size of the structure in which they're allowed to dwell. So I think some of that is already in there, and you could probably logically follow, the number based on square footage needed for birds too. So that was my only follow-up.
Can't hear you.
Our clerk, thank you. I believe that you have the drawings or the photos of Mr. Dorncott's property. Are you able to share those with us?
I can't seem to get to attach to an email. Oh, there we go. We got one anyway.
Mr. Dorncott, would you like to add comments to this as we're looking at this picture?
Yeah,
It's a very nice enclosure.
I'm sorry?
It's a very nice enclosure.
It's very expensive too. So the chicken coop there is in the backyard. You can see to the right of it, I have a garden. But the chicken coop itself is completely contained. Like the parts underneath, they can go underneath. And there's the chicken run that they think about 10 feet long, roughly, by about 3 or 4 feet wide, roughly. And then they go in there at night. Generally, they sleep inside. A couple of them have been stubborn, not wanting to sleep in the run, but I measured the distance today just to be sure it worked. It was about 40 feet away from my neighbor's house. So it would meet the requirement of 25 feet there. Hey, buddy. Yeah, I'm in a meeting, buddy. But yeah, other than that, if anybody has any questions, I can answer them. Oh, it also has the security lamp, as well as that was the other thing I wanted to mention at some point. I want for security purposes, keeping the chicken coop close to the house actually limits the predators, because I have another what's it called, spotlight that goes off, our motion detector that goes off, as well as one attached to the chicken coop as well. It's solar powered.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair.
Mr. Schuman.
Okay, I just so folks understand, so Mr. Dorncott called me up after he got cited. He called the police department and asked if it was okay to have chickens. They told him he could have 10 chickens. Great, so he gets 10 chicks. He's got them, raising them in his garage or whatever. When they start getting a little big, he goes out and he buys this expensive coop. Has it delivered. He builds it in the backyard, and you can see how attractive this thing is. And of course, one of his neighbors didn't like it, so they didn't reach out to me. They went right to the building department, and so now see, he had to. And this is I got a handful of people here that Marie sent me today that have a similar situation, that they're in violation right now. And they were told they were allowed to have chickens. So that's where the conflict comes from. And this is something we decided 8 years ago, that you could have these chickens. This is something we had I'm sure, I think you were the the chair of the meeting at the time, weren't you, Councilwoman?
I was, yes. And I remember
one of the biggest meetings we ever had. I was very new to council, and I thought, man, I don't want to do this anymore. That was tough.
Yeah.
But I thought what we ended up with was a pretty reasonable thing, and it worked out. And I don't think too many people ended up angry. But then, as time has gone by, People have tried to do the chickens and they can't do it. And so this has been going on for a while, where people have tried to do this and then been told they can't have the coop. So I'd like to be able to help Adam out and anybody else that would like to be able to do this. You're not going to have a ton of people wanting to do this. I don't want to do it. I just, you know, I'm going to Costco to get my food. So Giant Eagle, big fan. So thank you.
That's if they have your food, Paul. Ms. Heeman.
I'm going to go see Adam. That's what I'm going to do. Go see
You know,
Adam.
everybody ran out of eggs this COVID, so.
Not me. I stock up. Thank you, Madam Chair. I, you know, am not wholly opposed to this, because obviously my own lifestyle is, you know, a consumer of all of this sort of stuff. And I've been doing, I'll call it the hippie thing, for a lot of years, you know, putting things in jars. I do want to make sure that we're doing it carefully and correctly, because as Mr. Glassburn pointed out, you know, not every area of our city really is, you know, conducive to this. So, and I think that, you know, Mr. Dorncott should be like our expert as far as offering guidance to residents, because it's a tough thing to do. I mean, you see that people have dogs and then they don't even pick up after the dog. I mean, you know, Mr. Tork, you're at the HOA. I'm in one here myself, and it's like, what's the worst problem you got? Dogs. So I'd like to see perhaps what other cities do and what their requirements are. And I'd like to really make sure that, you know, to move this forward, that it's done carefully and correctly, so that residents who do want to have this are not offending their neighbors who maybe don't. And with that said, I mean, I think it's doable, but again, I'd like to give it very careful consideration. And I did read the minutes of the meeting that was held, and I thought that was good. But just again, because we're a more urban than farm environment. So that's what I would hope we could do, is see what other cities do. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Heeman. Are there any additional questions from committee?
More thing.
Mr. Schuman.
I got one more thing real quick. I would ask perhaps Chuck, you could look into this. I know for a fact that a lot of people are doing this in the city of Cleveland. As most of you know, I own property in the city of Cleveland, in Ohio City and Tremont area, and there's a lot of urban farming going on, and a lot of folks have chickens in their backyard. A lot of young people are into this. This has become a very hip thing to do right now. So I'd ask you to look in to see what the laws in the city of Cleveland are. I don't hear too many complaints about it, but I do hear a rooster every once in a while. Although we don't allow roosters in North Olmsted. Thank you.
Mr. Limpert.
I mean, just a comment. So I mean, it's always great when the pendulum swings back, in that probably there's people on council here now that there were chickens, you know, in North Olmsted when they were raised. So, you know, we clamped down on it as things built and expanded, and that, you know, the grocery marts became 5 different options here in North Olmsted, and now things are consolidating again. So, I mean, I think it's really prudent to look at this and make sure that we adjust this, given the pendulum kind of swinging back into the sustainability area. I think we do need to look at, you know, just kind of make sure we're all comfortable with the setback requirements and what that really means across different parts of the city. While I think it's important to enable this as an option, that doesn't mean that every property is suitable to have chickens. So I think we just need to look at that a little bit closer before, you know, before we move this forward.
Thank you, Mr. Limpert. Mr. Glassburn.
I apologize. I had one more question that occurred to me, and I don't know if the law director or the planning director might have thoughts on, which is, you know, we do have residential structures that are divided by different zones based on I believe the frontage. Is there any restriction or other area of law where we would restrict, say, like maybe the setback requirement could vary based on what zone it is? I don't know if that makes sense.
Mr. Chair, to Councilman Glassburn's question, the Chapter 1135 is our single residence districts, and in some cases there is differentiation made. You know, lot width, lot area, depth, size, minimum size of the dwelling come to mind. Also, we have a square footage of accessory structure permitted based upon lot size, so it's something that our code already does contemplate. So if that's something council would want to think about, it's already modeled in our code.
Director Lieber, how would that work with a duplex? Now, I know that we don't have many of them, but we do have them in the city. And I'm sorry, but as we're talking about this, I figured I would jump on that. We only have a few that I know of, but how would this whole process work with something like that?
The way that it's written now, or if we're considering a by lot size requirement, I guess, I mean, there's like one street where we have 2-family zoning currently. And certainly those properties can still have garages and sheds and things of that nature. So we normally don't treat those properties much differently than single family properties, but, you know, could consider some language around that potentially if council wanted to do that.
Thank you. Mr. Glassburn, I apologize.
No, that was quite all right. There's actually a handful of 2-family homes in my development as well. So I was glad that you asked that question. So that was always just I was thinking that maybe whatever the setback requirement is, it should be potentially contemplating how maybe wide lots are, because is the goal really, again, for it to be in the backyard but way in the back, or is it to be closer to the home? And so it might make sense based on, 25 feet is, I don't know, it seems a little arbitrary, but I appreciate your time. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Schuman.
The 25 feet, I think, the idea there was that even on the smallest lots, you'd be able to put a chicken coop. Some of the smallest lots in town are on South Porter and Burns, and with 25 feet from the neighboring dwelling, you'd probably be able to put a chicken coop up. And I think that's what that was the discussion at the Planning Commission. Was more a matter of, I mean, if we're going to let people do it, that we let everybody be able to do it. But again, I'm open to any kind of agreements we can come up with on council here to be able to allow these folks to do what they want to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schuman. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. My dog is about to bark. Seeing there are no other questions, which I don't believe there are, based on all of the questions and all of the information presented to us this evening, I'd like to ask our clerk to go ahead and, Chuck, if you wouldn't mind, would you please compile a list of other cities that have this type of ordinance in place?
Sure, I'd be happy to do so.
And then we'll hold this in committee, and then we will reconvene shortly. As soon as we have the information, then we can go ahead and set up our next meeting. Mr. Chuck.
We just need to make the motion then, if that's what you want to do.
And I will. Ms. Heeman.
Madam Chair. Director Groh, so how then are these violations just held for the moment while we're all debating this? Like, what's the relief that these people have, extensions, or what do they do? Because certainly we don't want them to have a problem while we're trying to figure it out.
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm not even aware that they're in the law department right now, that they've been referred for prosecution. So I'll have to look at it and see where those stand.
I can address that if you would like. Yes, there's a process through the building department where they are granted extensions. We did speak with Chuck prior to that to attempt to get your time schedule on this. So they were given a extension roughly in line with the time schedule when it was anticipated that you would take action either one way or the other. And I think we would probably extend them further as long as we would probably place them in abeyance and extend them further until there's some determination made by council to take action one way or another. So they've been given, the two I'm aware of, who have requested to begin formal extensions in line with the time schedule given to me based on council's anticipated action.
Mr. Mayor, did you have a comment?
Yeah, I would say that these guys will be granted an extension until this issue is resolved.
Thank you. And I think the rest of council appreciates that as well. If we could put a stay on that until this is resolved. Seeing that there are no further questions, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn this meeting now at 8:13 p.m. and then like
we need to vote on the, wait, don't we need to vote on the?
We're holding it in committee.
Yeah, just make a motion to hold it in committee and then it'll be formally held.
It's been a long night, right? I'll make a motion then to hold this in committee.
I'll second that. I'm sorry.
Who was that?
It was me, Paul.
Okay, seconded by Mr. Schuman. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Our meeting concludes at 8:13 p.m.
Thanks, everybody.